that the way buyers choose to engage with vendors in a B2B selling situation now has unquestionably changed. And any marketer who has been doing marketing for any length of time can tell you we are a heck of a lot busier now than we have ever been. And what we've seen is, research from Forrester says that approximately 80% of the buying process is now conducted either digitally or remotely in some way, where the buyer just doesn't want to be face-to-face with the seller. So marketing is the one that's stepping in and is kind of filling in that gap. And so what we've seen happen is, marketing has gone from spending all their time at the top of the funnel to kind of driving deeper and deeper down. So moving from awareness to interest to actually starting to drive buying decisions in ways that they just haven't before.
And that's a wrap. The weekly wrap, ending Friday, August 7th, 2020. This week, we're here on the CONTENTTECH Tech Content Center. That's right, where we're going to be having Content Tech, and we're pondering why we might actually have faith in chaos. Talking about the new importance of content in marketing and making meaningful content, and 3 questions you should be asking if you want to tackle trending topics. So let's wrap it up, shall we? Our theme this week, faith in chaos. As Bob Dylan once said, I accept chaos. I'm just not really sure whether it accepts me. That's getting ready for change, and this is the weekly wrap. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 81 of the Weekly Wrap, our weekly play on words that play in the world this week. Well, this week, I've got a question about why we need faith in chaos. And we've got just a wonderful conversation about the alignment of content and marketing with Leslie Talbot, someone who's literally putting the meaning into meaningful content. As always, I'm your host, Robert Rose, Chief Strategy Advisor for the Content Marketing Institute, and it's time to get this week's show underway. These are weird times, and I know I don't need to tell you that. What is the new normal or the next normal, or what is normal? In the midst of all this uncertainty, it seems that every marketing team I speak to these days is doing one of 3 things. They're preparing for a reorganization, in the midst of a reorganization, or just emerging from a reorganization. Now, I have no idea if that's factually true, but it's one of those things that feels true. In all 3 instances, I'm finding this weird paradox. Everybody wants to do meaningful things, but no one wants to start anything meaningful, including, ironically, me. I mean, how do you even begin to plan for the now when you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring for you or your client? For example, I've been working with the CMO of a technology company over the last 6 months, and they're a company that's doing very well, despite the dumpster fire that is 2020. But the CEO and the board didn't think the company was moving quite fast enough, so they suggested a complete reorganization of the product marketing and sales teams. Now, the CMO successfully explained to her leadership colleagues why this was a bad idea. But unfortunately, during the 6 weeks that she was making her case, the rumors began to fly. And even she didn't know how it was going to turn out. And even though the reorganization was ultimately put on hold, the marketing, sales, and even vendors, including yours truly, panicked and/or acted irrationally. And it cost them months of progress, a huge distraction, chaos. In business, we typically respond to impending chaos in one of 3 ways. We freeze, we get chaotic ourselves, or we continue down the path that we've been laying for so often. Now, when we freeze, we seek safety in activity. We say things like, I'm not moving forward on that cool, interesting new initiative. I'm going to keep my head down and I'm going to wait for chaos to strike, and then I'll figure out how to deal with it. Meanwhile, I'm taking zero risk. At the other end of the extreme, we get chaotic ourselves and we seek safety in hyperactivity. We try all kinds of things in anticipation of the chaos to say, oh, what do I have to lose? We flail around, moving in every direction at once and making a lot of noise, hoping people will see us as productive and leave us alone. The most helpful response, moving forward down our established path, requires us to embrace chaos, accepting that it will come again and again and again, and keep us in the game, keep our sanity. We seek ways to contribute strategic work through the things that we're doing. Sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. But tomorrow is always the next normal and the new normal. And there's always a tomorrow. So now it's time for our interview segment, and we've got a wonderful one for this show. I get to talk to Leslie Talbot from Corporate Visions. And as she says in her profile, she's challenging conventional wisdom and changing the customer conversation one Oxford comma at a time, which immediately makes me a fan, of course. And Leslie is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Programs at Corporate Visions, where she helps B2B companies develop the messages, content, and selling skills needed to master the four most critical value conversations. We talked a lot about that and the meaningful content and how that's really changing the nature of marketing and sales. And it was also the topic of a webinar that she recently did, which we also talked about, and getting to the real alignment of sales and marketing in B2B. I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Leslie. Leslie, my friend, how are you? It's good to see you.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You got I think you win the award for the best background, by the way. That is like perfectly designed and framed. Did you work on that, or is that just natural?
I actually did. So there's this great Twitter feed that I follow that's called roomrater.com. And if you follow it, what they actually do is they watch all the morning cable news shows, and then they take all the pundits and they rate them based on their backgrounds, like where they have their plants and what books they have on their bookshelves. So I'm a great student of that because my dream is to someday get a 10 out of 10 on RoomRater.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, can anybody get this rating, or is
they
it just
have to actually follow you? But I think you would do really well because I really like your background.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, and as I've told everybody, you have to do it these days, right? I mean, This is the thing you have to do, either that or go virtual with the green screen thing. All of this comes at great expense. I mean, it has been a journey to get something that looks halfway decent on these on these Zoom calls that we seem to perennially be on.
Yeah, it's better than looking like a hostage video. So
yes, that is very true. Well, of course, I've known you and I'm a fan of your work for so long. But for those in the audience who don't know who you are, catch us up. Tell us your story and where you're working now and what you're up to.
Sure. So my role is I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Programs at Corporate Visions. Corporate Visions is a sales and marketing training and consulting company. Everything that we do is backed by decision science. So that informs all of our processes and all of our methodology around everything that we do. My role as SVP of Strategic Programs is really to take ideas and bring them to fruition. And as part of my role, I'm responsible for bringing to market our training programs around specifically marketing skills. And that's a perfect fit for me. So I'm a writer by background. I actually started in the business world as a salesperson, but I was always that salesperson who rewrote all of the marketing content to make it better.
Wait a minute, a salesperson rewriting content? I've never heard of such a thing. I am shocked at that.
I hope I did a better job than the average salesperson, but I eventually just realized that, I had a calling, and so I crossed over to the dark side about 15 years ago, and I've been in the marketing field ever since. And I started at Corporate Visions 12 years ago, doing content, doing writing, doing consulting, and ever since then, I've just been incredibly privileged to be able to get involved in everything that we do that has to do with marketers and marketing and content. And that's what I love, and that's what I love doing. So this is really, kind of the best job I've ever had in my life.
It's awesome. It's
Yeah,
awesome. And I can personally vouch for the work you guys do. I mean, I've been following the work of Corporate Visions
yeah,
for any number of years now, going, I mean, I don't want to show how old we are, but but
a long
but
time.
yeah, a long time. We've been doing this. Well, I mean, and speaking of that, sort of going to the dark side, I know in you are completely passionate, and will have just, by the way, finished last week a webinar on this
Yep,
idea of becoming a memorable marketer, and sort of that transition, that isn't just sales to marketing, marketing to sales, but sort of represents I guess, a higher prominence for the marketer these days. This shift of the buying process, which we've all been aware of. I mean, it's,
yeah.
you can't throw a rock and not hit somebody talking about the change of the buying process. But you guys are talking about it in a slightly different way, right? Sort of this idea of marketing's new role in the organization. Tell me a little bit about what the webinar was all about and what you guys talked about.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and this is definitely a trend that we've been tracking for a few years. One of the things that we pinpointed a couple of years ago was that there has been kind of a really subtle but important shift from in budgets as percentage of revenue. And what we saw starting to happen a couple of years ago was that money was getting shifted out of sales and toward marketing. So you kind of saw, I think it was like a 21% or 24% shift in either direction, where you saw more marketing coming out, more money coming out of sales and going toward marketing. And as we followed that trend, one of the things that became very clear to us is that the way buyers choose to engage with vendors in a B2B selling situation now has unquestionably changed. And any marketer who has been doing marketing for any length of time can tell you we are a heck of a lot busier now than we have ever been. And what we've seen is, you know, research from Forrester says that approximately 80% of the buying process is now conducted either digitally or remotely in some way, where the buyer just doesn't want to be face to face with the seller. So marketing is the one that's stepping in and is kind of filling in that gap. And so what we've seen happen is, marketing has gone from spending all their time at the top of the funnel to kind of driving deeper and deeper down. So moving from awareness to interest to actually starting to drive buying decisions in ways that they just haven't before. And the number one factor that drives decisions is memory. Your marketing it touches somebody in one place, but they don't make the decision to buy until a later time and a later place. So if you want to be effective as marketer, it stands to reason that you need to be memorable, and everything that you do needs to be memorable as well.
It's a fascinating point of view. I mean, obviously, it feeds right into the whole sort of have a point of view,
Yep.
be provocative to some extent, to sort of create unique stories, create this idea of being memorable. When you're seeing in the clients that you're working with, because of course one of the big challenges there, as this shift has happened, we've seen this anyway,
Mm-hmm.
is that sort of classic pitched battle between sales and marketing, right? So sales says, well, yeah, you're getting into my territory now, helping facilitate much of the buyer's journey down to that consultative sale or the account-based marketing sale, or whatever it happens to be. And marketers are saying, yes, we are encroaching into this territory, but there seems to be sort of a dispute over, well, what kind of content is really needed, right? In many
Yeah.
cases, sales wants X, marketing is prepared to deliver Y, and there's sort of a tension there. How do you see some of that stuff resolving itself in sort of this idea of the memorable marketer?
So it's interesting too, because I'm old enough to remember when sales and marketing alignment used to be a thing. And what we're seeing now is more of a sales and marketing convergence, where it's really hard to tell where marketing ends and sales begins. That handoff that always used to happen from marketing to sales at a specific point in the buying process doesn't really happen anymore, because marketers are going in and out of that funnel. And I put air quotes around funnel
Right.
because I have a whole philosophy around the whole idea of the buying funnel and why that might be a little bit of an outmoded concept. But because it's really difficult to tell the difference, you kind of have to step back and take a look and say, what is the constant? And the constant that you have between sales and marketing is not whether you're in sales or marketing or customer success, which is a whole nother funnel that you also have to think about, but is the buyer. And so all of the work that we do, all of our methodology, all of the things that we produce are all based around the buyer psychology, around something called decision science. And if you base everything that you do around the science, around the buyer psychology, it doesn't matter whether you're in sales, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in customer success, or where you are in the organization, because the science doesn't care. It's the way buyers frame value and make decisions that is what really matters. So if you take a look at any of the corporate visions frameworks or any of the work that we do, that we talk about, that we promote, it is all based around decision science and buyer psychology.
It's fast. It's almost like we should know our customers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like big, shocking news here that we should actually have some insight into what our customers think, want, need, enjoy, are inspired
Yeah.
by, are provoked by, et cetera. When you're looking at sort of that customer research, buyer research, does it sort of represent itself as something that gets used by the entirety of the organization? Or there's a lot of talk these days about, well, we have our buyer personas that sales uses, and we have our marketing personas that marketing uses, and everybody sort of creates their own idea of what that is. Are you seeing some, I mean, alignment is probably the wrong word. Are you seeing some convergence there in terms of how that decision science actually drives customer, profiling or persona building?
Yeah, and so we actually started a much more fundamental level than personas. I think there's a place for personas. They actually come a little bit later in our process. When we look at buyers, we kind of separate them into kind of two camps. So whether or not they're new prospects that you're looking to acquire, or whether they're existing customers that you're looking to keep and grow. And what we found is that the psychology between those two camps is 180 degrees different. And this was borne out by a lot of research that we did a few years ago around this concept of status quo bias, which simply says people hate change. And all things being equal, people don't want to change unless they have to. So when you're a marketer or a seller and you are looking to acquire a new prospect, acquire a new logo, you want to do everything possible to disrupt and defeat their status quo bias. You want them to change, you want them to change now, and you want them to pick you. That's what you want to do. But when you are the status quo, when it's an existing customer and you want them to grow, you want them to renew, you want to upsell them in some way, the last thing in the world you want to do is disrupt yourself. So that means that you need to create messages and content that reinforce their status quo bias, that reassure them that working with you is the best thing that they ever could have done in their life, and they're achieving results, they're progressing toward their goals, but you need to message that differently. So understanding where your customer falls, which one of those two camps your customer falls in, is the first step to creating those messages.
Do you think that gets into an idea of, I mean, certainly the word storytelling gets thrown around a lot, as kind of a buzzword here. Do you find that when you're looking at those sort of two camps, that it affects the way that you're advising clients on how to do things like thought leadership, right? So in other words, is it one of those things is as we start to create content and thought leadership, we say, okay, great. The first thing we want to look at for this piece of thought leadership is which camp is it going to go down? Or is there another kind of framework to look at?
Yeah, no, that's you definitely want to think about it that way, because you think about when you're, one of the worst things that a marketer can do is send a disruptive, provocative, radically, different message to an existing customer that your sellers are trying to renew, right? Because our research actually shows that when you do that, we tested this. When you do that, it makes them 10% less likely to renew with you than if you used a message that reinforced the status quo. So you definitely want to make that separation. So with an existing customer, the types of things that you want to be able to reinforce are, number one, what were their original goals when they were working with you? How are they making progress toward those goals? What's the risk of doing something different? How do you as a seller leverage what we call your incumbent advantage to kind of capitalize on people's natural aversion to change? And then if you're looking to upsell them, you can introduce a little bit of disruption into that message, but the idea is to introduce disruption that takes them along with you versus pushing them away from you. So we've got different message frameworks that I talked about in my podcast that cover the why change, why stay, and why evolve messages, which all use different messaging and different structures to get your buyer to do what they want to do, depending on whether or not they're a prospect or an existing customer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It aligns very well with something that we teach in workshops a little bit, which is this idea, we call it the 3 layers of thought leadership, which maps very well to what you're talking about, which is we call it the inspiration to change, the implications of change, and the how to change, right? Which
exactly.
is, in one, you're basically trying to make a B2B customer be inspired enough to go, all right, I actually want to make a decision, right? Because of that sort of classic no decision. I want to change. And then you've got and this is the part, that middle part we find, I'd be curious to get your take, is the part that very few B2B companies actually do, is the implications of that change, both good and bad, right?
Yeah.
In other words, you've decided to change. Now, what does that mean, right? What does that, well, there's a solutions that you can look at. Here's the challenges of that. Here's the hard part of that. Here's the good part of that. And then, of course, there's sort of the how to, like, here's what you need to do step by step, your instructions. What I find is that a lot of B2B thought leadership, what gets purported to be thought leadership, sort of tries to do 1 and 3, right?
Yeah.
In other words,
and they miss that middle layer, which
exactly.
is the most
It's sort
important.
of like, yeah.
Well, so it's interesting. So, I always used to hear, sell value, sell value, sell value, right? And value is a wonderful thing, but value in and of itself is not differentiated, right? Like
Right.
Everybody can say, you'll be happier, you'll be able to focus on your work, you'll be able to, free up time, all those kind of outcomes and results. And it's important, but it's the how you get there. It's how you drive those results that you want people to really focus on, because that's where your differentiation is. And any good message that you create, especially when you're in a change, when you're trying to get people to change, any good message that you create has got to get driven by what's different about you. And I think this is another big mistake that a lot of marketers make is, they talk about what they think is important to the customer, but the customer doesn't know what they don't know. And so one of the things that our methodology teaches is this concept of what we call unconsidered needs, which are challenges the customers have that might be unknown or unmet or underappreciated challenges that happen to map directly to the stuff that you sell that is unique and differentiated. So your job as a marketer is to get them to care about the stuff that you want them to care about, because that's what's going to elevate your message, and that's what's going to make it different and distinct. So, the unconsidered need plays very well into that how, and that, that middle piece that you were talking about before.
Yeah, it's that classic. It goes back to that What's that classic going back to what I think it was Donald Rumsfeld who did the known
The
knowns,
known
the
knowns,
known
the known
unknowns, right?
unknowns.
And the
Yeah,
unknown knowns
exactly.
is what you're talking about, right? What is it
Yeah,
we don't know? We don't,
yeah.
yeah.
And I
Well,
mean, and in fairness, sometimes it's really difficult to find a completely unknown need that your customer doesn't know about, because customers are pretty smart. They kind of know their world. But, it's far more likely that you're going to uncover needs that either they think they were solving or that they just don't think are important enough to solve. So again, your job as a marketer is to get them to understand that they're not doing it right, because if they're not buying your thing, they're not doing it right. Or or that they need to care more about it because of X, Y, and Z reason.
yeah. Well, it's one of those things like, it's that middle layer, right? Where it's like the implications part, the chances are is your competitors aren't talking about that, right? They're not
Yeah,
talking about, I mean, one of my favorites is that, when you basically say, let's talk about all the bad things that could happen if you make this change. And
yeah,
let's help you understand, because most of your competitors are, I don't want to go near anything that's negative, right? Anything that
yeah,
might consider them to not make this change. But that's some of those unconsidered needs, right? Is, well, what happens if disaster does strike?
yeah.
you
And
know
here's another a kind of another sciencey thing that we talk about a lot in our messaging and in our trainings, is that people are 2 to 3 times more likely to take action to move away from a bad thing than they are to move toward a good thing.
Hmm.
So if you were to kind of hit somebody, and there's a whole there's kind of a whole Nobel Prize winning study around this, that was conducted by an economist named Daniel Kahneman, and he calls it prospect theory. But that he basically proved that through his experiments. So if you were to hit a customer and talk to a customer and ask them how they're doing, and they'd say, you know what, I'm doing okay, I'm holding my own, there's things I could do better, but there's things I could be doing a lot worse. And if you were to say to them, yeah, but you know what, if you buy my thing, I'm going to make things better for you in XYZ way, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, yeah, I see some value in that, but not enough to do anything different. But if you were to take that same status quo and say, okay, but have you thought about this? And have you thought about this? And XYZ company, did this, and look what happened to them. So you kind of create that discomfort in their status quo. All of a sudden, you're creating enough, and I don't want to say fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because that's not what this is about, but this is about taking a reasoned consultative approach to alerting your customers to issues that they need to start caring about, that otherwise are going to come out of the blue and smack them in the face.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
motivation to change, right? It's
Yep.
because it's like, yay, change, said
Yep.
nobody ever, right?
And then you contrast that with the likely outcome of making that change, and all of a sudden they see much more value in your solution. And you've given them kind of a light out of the dark tunnel that you've put them in.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
I could geek out. I love this stuff so much. I could geek out all day with you on this. For the sake of time, where
Sure.
can people connect with you? I'm going to guess Corporate Visions,
Corporate
but
Visions, L Talbot at corporatevisions.com. But you can also follow me on Twitter. It's Leslie Talbot. That's my handle on Twitter, LESLIETALBOT. And you can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. And, I love talking with people about this stuff. As you said, we could geek out about it all day. And I'm always happy to.
fantastic. Leslie, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No, it was great.
And now, well, now it's time for us to get the last segment of the show, which of course is one post on CMI's site that I hope you take a first look at, a second look at, a third look at. And it's just a great one this week. It's 3 questions to see if you should be tackling trending topics. It's by Amanda Milligan, and just a wonderful post. And it's just a great one, not too old, actually, just a couple of weeks old here. And the article starts out by talking about how topical content has its advantages, but it can also trip you up. With content focused on trending topics, you can have an audience primed to find subject matter valuable, which will quickly lead to higher views and shares and value. But the trade off is investing your time to create content that could more quickly become irrelevant. How do you balance that? How do you decide when to pursue trending topics or stick with your more evergreen topical content? Answer these 3 questions and you'll have a much better answer, she says. And then she goes through these 3 questions, and they're simply a great pressure test of deciding whether you want to continue on with your idea of trending content. So go check it out. I want you to go see it. It's just a wonderful post and a great reminder of how much topicality we need in our content strategy. And well, that's a wrap of episode number 81. I hope you're all out there truly taking care of each other and taking care of yourselves. And yeah, to that extent, wear a mask, folks. Wear one. Just do it. For yourselves, for others. I'm so grateful that you're here right now to take 35 minutes in your day to actually watch or to listen to the show. And I really do hope you're digging it. We're having a good time making it. We're thinking of new formats all the time. And so hashtag us up, won't you? Weekly wrap on Twitter or LinkedIn or anything you like. And let us know what new things, new interviews, new content you'd like to see on the show. And if you don't like it, like you found this thing some random way in YouTube or something like that, and you don't like it, well, just turn it off. You don't have to listen or watch it. In the immortal words of Taylor Swift, you would hide away and find a piece of your mind with some indie record that's so much cooler than mine. But for now, hugging the chaos, embracing it, getting ready for it, having faith in it. What I've learned is that when I sense chaos is coming, changes that I'll have little control over, I find that there's little comfort in hiding in inactivity. I get no satisfaction in distracted chaos hyperactivity. However, I do find confidence and peace in hugging the chaos, embracing it. It's my faith in myself that no matter what comes, I can create a future that I want to be part of. Now, interestingly, the irony is that the more chaos we experience, the more faith in ourselves we need. And 2020 has served up a heaping platter full of the need to have faith in ourselves. It's funny, rational thought, which was always seemed to be in conflict with our faith, now depends on our faith to save it. Just because it's the weirdest times does not inherently mean it has to be the worst of times. Hug the chaos. It just might hug you back. It's your story, folks. Tell it well. I'll see you next week on the Weekly Wrap.